podcast is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Out of the Ashes presents Missing Dad.
I might have ended up on the wrong side of the tracks if Pops wouldn't have pulled me back and said, yo.
Each episode is a thought-provoking interview with people across all walks of life to see how they were affected by missing key pieces in their relationship with their dad.
I told him as a youngster, he'll be the greatest man alive.
And now your hosts, Coley Harris and Amar Mountain.
Welcome to another episode of Missing Dad. I'll be your co-host, Coley Harris.
And I'm the other co-host, Amar Melton.
It feels like it's been a long time.
It has.
It's been a long time. When was the last time we put out an episode?
It's been at least a month and a half, 2 months.
Yeah, it's been too long. So just so everybody know, just like everybody else in the rest of the world, COVID has impacted us. We had a little poop video one time. We had a bad one. So we had to discard it, but fortunately enough, we were able to bring back one of our very special friends, a colleague, a researcher, a soldier, definitely a strong supporter of the communities from our hometown of Chicago. But now we got her now Chicago, and she's down here working with us. So again, Ann, we're so fortunate and blessed to have you here with us today. We're looking forward really to jumping in and talking about Missing Dad, talking about what this project means to us, coming out of the ashes and into Missing Dad. So, Amar?
So, Ann, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell the people who you are, what you do.
Okay, my name, like you said, is DrAnn Aviles. I am originally from Chicago. I've been in Delaware about 4 years now. I came August of 2016. I do research and teach at the University of Delaware in Human Development and Family Sciences. Before that, I was in Chicago teaching at Northeastern Illinois University in Educational Foundations. What else can I tell you all? I am one of four. Both my parents came here from Puerto Rico to the States. One to New York, then eventually Chicago. I don't know. Anything else?
No, that's fine.
That's great.
So you said you're one of four. Are you the only girl?
No, I am the youngest girl.
Youngest girl.
Okay.
So
So you're spoiled.
No, I'm also a middle child. So
All of that.
all of that. So I have a sister that's the oldest, and then my brother, myself, and then another brother.
So, Ann, tell us a little bit about growing up in Chicago, experience with your parents coming from Puerto Rico, and how was all of that?
Interesting. I'll say that. Chicago is unfortunately one of the most segregated cities in our nation. So our first neighborhood we lived in was very much Puerto Rican Mexican, and then my dad was very involved in a lot of the Puerto Rican community, and so he kept us involved. So in Chicago, Humboldt Park is like the park, right, for the Puerto Rican community. That's where the Puerto Rican Festival happens. That's where every summer, well, except COVID, right, concerts, like all kinds of stuff were happening all the time. So because of the disinvestment, now I understand all this, but at the time, right, a lot of crime in the community, a lot of poverty, and so my parents moved us out of that neighborhood into a more, I guess, integrated neighborhood because of issues of safety.
Okay.
But most of our family lived in that neighborhood, so it's known as Lakeview area, which has now been gentrified heavily. I doubt you'll find many Puerto Rican or Mexican folks still in that community now. So because my family all lived there, so both my parents are the oldest. So my mom is one of five, my dad's one of three. And so they took care of their mothers.
Right.
So my dad owned a building, a 3-flat in the Lakeview neighborhood, and so basically the whole family lived in building.
Okay.
His mom, my mom's mom, her sisters, their kids. So basically every Sunday it was like family.
Yeah.
So we would just go and it was a great time. I mean,
Nice.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it was just interesting, I think, navigating those different communities.
Yeah. So you said you moved from the Humboldt Park area to, you said Lakeview?
No, the biggest Puerto Rican community in Chicago is in Humboldt Park.
Okay.
Lakeview at that time, this was late 60s, early 70s, was heavily Puerto Rican and Mexican.
Okay.
And then we moved further north to like Albany Park, which is a more like multicultural, for lack of a better way to say it, like just a much more diverse neighborhood. So
Yeah.
that changed, I think, a lot of my perspective in terms of interacting with folks from other communities.
Yeah. So you had your maternal and your paternal grandmothers right there with you growing up. Like how do you think that impacted you as a person?
It was actually, so my maternal and my paternal grandmothers, they were like best friends. Like they got along really, really well. They looked out for each other all the time. I think because both of them were divorced or separated, who even knows legally what was happening, but it was just them,
Yeah.
right? And so my paternal grandmother actually had custody of one of my cousins. So she raised him, and then my maternal grandmother, two of my aunts lived with her for, I don't know, a long time, like growing up. And then the other one ended up moving into like the basement apartment. So it was just everybody was in the same building. So when people say like, oh, who's your friend? It was like, oh, my cousins, right?
Yeah.
Because that was my people. So
Right.
like going over to the building, we would just say like every Sunday was great. Good food, games, party, I mean, you name it, it was happening.
Nice. So, I mean, back then, so we're looking at families, so obviously you had like a large extended family, which is that's pretty dope, you know what I mean, growing up in that. Is that something that was common in the Latino community in Chicago around that time?
Yeah, I think most of my Latino friends, definitely. It was, abuela lived in the house, grandma, cousins. It was nothing to have several families, either in the same, like on the same block, in the same building. And I think, I don't know, for me, it was definitely centered family, right? Like we looked out for each other. I remember just any event, if anybody messed with any one of us, it was like, oh no, all the cousins were showing up. Yeah, exactly.
Let's go.
Exactly.
Everybody.
Literally
Yeah.
everybody. Like
Yeah.
people knew, don't mess with her, because people will come.
Yeah. So, what was your relationship like with your parents, your mother and your father?
I think we had a good relationship, and we still have a good relationship. As I said, I'm one of four. So my joke is, by the time I came around, they were like, just as long as you don't like kill nobody, you're fine.
Right.
My parents, they kept a close eye on us. Like for college, I know I'm jumping ahead, but I'll come back. Going away was not really an option, right? I stayed home for school. But they wanted to know who we were spending time with, what we were doing, so we became like the household everybody came to.
Right.
So it's like, oh, you want to hang out with your friends? Tell them to come over.
Right.
So as a result of that, I would say, a lot of brothers, right? Because both my brothers, their friends were always over. So like those became my brothers.
Right.
My sister was older, and so I think because of the age gap, she was already in high school and like college by the time like I was hanging out, so I didn't spend as much time with her and her friends, but like me and my brothers, like our friends are all intermingled.
Right.
So I think it created a lot of community. I think it was also my parents' way of keeping tabs on what we were doing and who we were with. My dad was always talking about, you are the company you keep.
Yeah.
Right? Be careful who you spend time with, what you do, because they are a reflection of you.
Nice.
Which parent was more like the, I don't want to call it overprotective, but which parent was more concerned with keeping you close to home?
I think both of them.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think by the time I hit like adolescence, I would say, my mom was probably a little more of like an advocate for me, in terms of like, oh, she can do that. Like, she'll be okay. Where my dad was like, I don't know if I feel comfortable sending her, you know, here, there, or whatever. But I think because they were so strict with my sister. Like, they were old school. They are so old school. But it was like, when she went to college, she still had like 11 o'clock curfew.
Whoa.
They did not care. Like, you're in college and like you need to be home. But as a result of that, she was very rebellious. So she would just sneak out. It's like, okay, she would come home when they told her to come home, and then she would sneak out. So that ended up creating.
And you would look out for her.
Oh, always. By choice or not.
Right.
She literally would be like, if anybody comes, because we shared a room. It's like, if anybody comes in the room, or no, don't let anybody come in the room. And if you go to the bathroom, like, shut the door, make sure, right, parents don't see. But I was probably middle school, if that. But that ended up having her leave home early, because once they found out she was sneaking out, that created issues, so she just left home. And I think as a result of that, by the time I hit high school and college, they were a little more lenient, but I think it was more the concern that I too would rebel and leave.
Right.
Yeah.
I got the benefit of being a younger child. I'm the youngest.
Okay.
And by the time I came along, I could do anything I wanted to do.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
My sisters, though, my older sisters, they would look at me like, because I got, like, my sisters, like, it's such a gap between us. Me and all of my brothers and sisters. Like, my older sister was literally 24 years older than me. Then my next was like 19 years older than me. So they was like, Mom, the stuff that he get away with, you would have killed us.
Yeah.
I just got away with it, so I definitely understand that.
Yeah, it was interesting though, because even though they gave me more slack, there was still a gender piece, right? Where, because my older brother and I are only 2 years apart, so I would watch what he did and when he did it. And so when I would hit that age, I'd be like, well, so I should be able to do this. And they'd be like, no, you can't. And I'd be like, well, Chris did it. They're like, oh, well, he's a boy. I was like, well, hold on. This doesn't seem right. But they were like, no, you can't do it yet. You're a girl.
Right.
Like, slow down.
Tell me about your father's upbringing. Did he have any siblings? What was his relationship like with his dad?
Yes, he has 2 siblings. So he's also the oldest, all boys. So there's 3 of them. That's a good question. Honestly, I can say that my dad does not talk a lot about his family. We spent a lot, like, so everybody in that building was my mom's family, with the exception of my grandmother, right? His mother. His parents divorced and his dad remarried. Because I remember having, like, we would see more around, like, the holidays. We would see his side of the family, and I remember I had like an uncle that I was like, oh, he's an uncle, because he was so much younger, right? He was close to our age because his father had remarried. I don't know that they had much of a relationship, quite honestly, just because, I don't know if it's because of the separation between his parents, and he definitely was like the carer for my grandmother, like made sure she was taken care of. He never spoke ill of his father, I could say that, but he never really had much to say, even in his own upbringing. When he talks about some of the people that mentored him, he talks about, you know, the person who hired him and other folks looking out. He doesn't really talk too much about his own father.
And you said your father, if I remember correctly, I know he was very involved in the community, but he was also an entrepreneur, if I remember correctly, right?
Yes, so he, so straight out of high school, he talks about, you know, more vocational kind of education or internships that they had. And so he worked for a men's clothing store, and he ended up becoming manager, and then the person that owned it, they moved to Florida and basically made him, like, he He ran the store. So when that person passed away, the wife sold my dad the business.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's well nice. And that was a gentleman he said was kind of like a mentor to him.
Yeah, he would come, yeah, Mike was like a dad to him. He really looked out for him. Showed him, you know, the whole business, sales, and my dad did everything. Like he was sales, he was bookkeeper, he was tailor. I mean, you name it, he ran it.
Right.
And he learned all of that through Mike.
How much time did you spend around the store?
Quite a bit.
Sound like you liked it.
Yeah. Yes and no. The store was on, so like I said, Chicago's very divided. The store was on like the northwest side of the city, and again, a neighborhood, primarily, actually the neighborhood was Latino and Black, right, depending on how far you west you went. Another, you know, disinvested, even though the Chicago Avenue is where it was, so Chicago Avenue between like Ashland and Dayton for any Chicago folks. But it was a very vibrant community for folks, right, who would come and shop there.
Right.
So every summer they would do sidewalk sales. So it was our job to make sure nobody stole anything from the sidewalk sale. Did not matter how old we were. It was like, just watch the stuff. Of the four of us, only my youngest brother, like, kind of took that up. I would go help out, like, as needed. So my dad had to go do something. I should say it was also family business. So, like, my dad ran it, my mom ran it, and then eventually my brother worked with them as well.
Right.
And so my mom would work there during the day, and then she would leave around school time, come home, right, to get us situated, and then cook dinner.
Okay.
And then my dad would come home. So that was, but he was there 7 days a week, holidays, everything. Like, if he was not at the store, it was a problem. So getting away was hard. What we thought were vacations were actually him taking us to Florida to meet with the owner to basically go over the books and business. Right, so that was our vacation, because we would drive to Florida, he would check in, and then we would come home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your relationship, I mean, how would you characterize your relationship with your dad?
I would say we have a good relationship. I think my dad is, how can I say this? He's a disciplinarian for sure, but he's also very kind, very loving. Like, he was the one who would always, I would say probably more than my mom, you know, be affectionate with us, tell us how much he cared about us, you know, I'm proud of you, I love you. He was, if you upset him, it was a problem. But if you were in his good graces, you were good, right? So I would say even still today, right, he is very, like, you know, I'll say daddy's girl, right, for the girls, like, oh, you know, the most beautiful girl, how are you doing, right? It's very, always, like, very affectionate, I guess is a better word. In terms of, I would say more, like, personal stuff, I would say both my parents, my dad especially, like, there's only so much they really want to know. And then they're like, no, you don't have to share, you don't have to say more. I think they prefer to kind of know enough, but not too much.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for somebody growing up, a young lady growing up, you grew up with both of your parents, and you're a professor, you know what I mean, you're a social scientist, right? And so I know you dig all into family and family lives, and matter of fact, what's the, you teach? What is that you teach?
It's so I'm in human development and family sciences, and I teach a class called Families in Their Communities.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, so from your experience, your personal experience growing up and things that you observed, like, what do you think the difference is in people who don't have, like, who have their father in their life?
I think it very much depends, just because, and I know that is like such a academic response, but I think you can have a parent around physically, but are they there for you emotionally? You know what I mean? And really supportive.
Right.
And I think that's different than someone who's actively involved.
So let's say having an active father.
Yeah.
Good father was.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely. I mean, I think it gives you a sense of security, right? You kind of know when I get home, or when they get home, right? These things will happen. In terms of support, like my dad, he didn't come very often because of his work, but when I like played sports in school, especially, he played baseball. So when I played softball, he was showing up the game, which was good and bad. He was a great cheerleader, a little too much of a cheerleader. It's like, please don't come back to my game.
He embarrassed you?
Oh, completely yelling the whole time. I was like, oh my goodness. We all played soccer as well. And when he could, he would come to the games, and very much, like, he's very competitive. Right. So he was like, yes, in it to win it. So I think definitely it provides young people in particular with a sense of stability, sense of safety, versus, I don't, maybe he's coming around or maybe he's not. I think it definitely impacts your just overall well-being, right? Your identity, how you see yourself. For some people, their sense of worth, right? Because a lot of kids internalize, like, well, they're not coming home because maybe something I did or I'm not good enough, versus like whatever they have going on in their life.
Right. Okay. How'd your relationship change, if at all, with your father between from when you were younger to when you became an adult?
It took him a while to adjust. I think he's still adjusting to the fact that I'm an adult. I think in his mind, I'm still a child, right? And not in a condescending way, but like he always has this sense of responsibility for my care, my well-being. So even going to visit them now, they're in Ohio. As soon as, I pull up in the car, it's like, oh, let me get your bags, right? Like, I'm good. It's okay. So I think that in terms of my independence, he definitely supported it. As I said, when I started college, I did not go away. I did my undergrad. I lived at home, graduated, got like a professional job, still lived at home. My parents did not want me to leave, like, quite honestly. My mom told me, like, well, when you get married, you leave. And I was like, ooh, well, I don't know. This might be a while. So I think I want some independence first. So when I started, I would say my first year of graduate school, both of my brothers had children. So it was just a lot happening in the house. As I said, our house was always like, come one, come all. So that did not change when people had kids. My younger brother in particular, I think he was like 18 or 19, with his first child. So he was at the house a lot. And so it just made, for anyone with children and trying to go to school, and even right now, especially during COVID, like a 2 or 3 year old while you're trying to write a paper is hard to work with. And so my nephew I love my nephew to death, and he's now like 20 something, would come in my room and I'm trying to write, type stuff up, and he's like crawling up on me. And I was like, might be time to get your own place. It's like, this might be an indicator here, a sign. So when I told my parents, my mom was not happy. My dad wasn't excited, but he supported me. Like, he went with me to look at the apartment. I was in my early 20s, but I had never had a place, so I needed a co-signer. He co-signed for me. So, like, he's supportive in that way. I think he trusts that I make good decisions. I don't know that he necessarily agrees with the decisions that I make.
So he trusts you.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah. Overall.
Yeah. So coming from Chicago, and I pay attention to cities and stuff. I think Chicago's like 40, 50 times bigger than Wilmington, something like that. It's a real big number.
Yeah, we have
a very big number.
Yeah, Chicago has about, I want to say 2 point something million people, just in the city proper, not in Illinois.
So that's probably like, yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of people.
Because Wilmington's what, like 70,000?
Yeah, around 71,000. Ain't going down.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, me coming from Chicago, I'm coming to Wilmington. I know there's some things that are different, but things that are the same in seeing the communities and like what impact in Chicago and in all your travels. You know what I mean? And all your experience and research. Like what impact has fatherlessness connected to incarceration and other things, absenteeism for our fathers, whether it be, you know, addiction, mental health issues, or whatever like that. What impact do you think that's overall had on the, you know, on the poor communities, the Black and brown communities?
Definitely not a good one. I think that the current system of incarceration does more harm than good. I think that the system in general, the way it works, like if we go back to what was it called? I'm trying to remember, there's a term, but basically in order for a family to get access to funding and services, right, you could not have a man in the house.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's an indicator of family disruption, right? And that's not the family's choice, that's a system that basically penalizes you for having a father in the household, right? You get less access, exactly, to services, you get less funding. I mean, in the 70s, if there was a man in the house, you could just get all of your benefits cut off. So I think that definitely has, I don't want to say discouraged, but it's, if a family's already struggling to put food on the table, to pay rent, those things, and if getting the money means not having the man around, I think both the man and woman will make that sacrifice for their family, which I think actually speaks volumes to the care that men have, right, for their families. But the way it's portrayed has been that they don't care, that they don't want to be responsible. There's a lot of literature that says actually Black fathers are more involved in their children's lives than other racial ethnic groups. But the assumption, right, is that they're not. I think that there are lots of men, whether they are the biological father, who have taken up the mantle of fatherhood. So for example, one of my uncles does not have any biological children, but he has like 5 children, right? And so when he married his first wife, who unfortunately passed away, he basically became dad to all the kids. Mm-hmm. And so even to this day, there's, you know, those are my cousins, that's their pops, you know, there's no denying any of that. So I think that men often get a bad rap, and I think that's more the media and stereotypes more so than the reality. But I do think that when fathers are taken, right, whether it's incarceration or addiction, that it definitely impacts the children and, you know, the household in negative ways, whether they end up, you know, incarcerated as well, or having issues with addiction, or I would say a lot of it is they are probably angry, hurt, right, sad about the situation, and then they cope in ways that maybe aren't the healthiest. But again, I think that's because of the system in place, not necessarily that the family is bad or the kid is bad.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely everything that you said, I definitely agree with. I've read literature as well, talking about involvement of Black fathers. I think it might have been even a CDC report that I've read. And it's amazing how that narrative just kind of just lingers out there and lays out there, like these deadbeat fathers, these deadbeat, you know, these Black fathers, and how people, the community even internalize it in some aspects. I don't blame the community, but we internalize that. So,
let me ask something real quick.
Yeah, sure.
How long do you think they were pushing that narrative? Because I feel like I feel like a big piece of changing that is controlling our own narrative and controlling our own media for long enough for it to kind of impact multiple generations. I don't think it's like a one generation thing. I think like 2 or 3, like my grandkids would have to have been brought up in a world where this narrative was pushed that, you know, black fathers are in the household. But prior to all of this data and stuff, how long do you think that they were kind of just pushing this narrative that just black men aren't good fathers before we kind of was like, hey, no, this isn't the case. We are. We're present. We're here.
I think, unfortunately, like slavery.
Yeah.
I mean, really, if you think about even when folks were brought over, right, the first thing they did was separate them, right? They took the kids, because you could, technically they were quote unquote property, right? And so it was like, well, they're not a family, these are workers. So we're gonna take the father here, we're gonna put the, you know, so then it was like automatically you've disrupted that whole family unit. And then I think once slavery ended, it was still this demonization, right? Because people still did not view black families, black people in general, as fully human.
Right.
So I think it's always been the narrative. I don't know when we've had a different narrative. I think that when folks were able to create their own communities, right? If you think about like, what is it, Oklahoma, Philly, where there were these small enclaves of black communities who were like, okay, you don't want us to be a part of your community? Cool, we're good. We're gonna make our own community.
Right.
Those were bombed,
I was gonna say, didn't they bomb both of them?
Exactly. So I think that is, I don't know that we've ever had that narrative. I think people are pushing it more now. I'm thinking about the first time I'll say I saw it was probably mid-2000, maybe 2010, 2009. I think it was Ebony Magazine did a cover in June, right? Father's Day month, called The New Black Father. And I thought that was very interesting because one, the assumption was that this was new, right? That black fathers were now doing more and being more active. But I think it was one way that they were trying to push that narrative.
Yeah. And it's, you know, thinking about what you're saying, like, just how much people, like, really buy into that, you know what I mean, about fathers, I mean, black fathers being deadbeats and not being, I mean, present. There's one thing I said, you know, from our story, from Out of the Ashes, for those who don't know, like Amar and I, this is my biological son, and we were separated for 14 years due to incarceration. And I went to prison, he was 2 years old, I came home, he was 16 years old. But even in that, like, being a young man in my early 20s, and, you know what I mean, taking a twisted route, you know what I mean, in my teens and early 20s, and then going to prison, like, but it still didn't take away from me loving my son. And, you know, there's plenty of guys who separated from their families. In my case, it was incarceration, plenty of guys in prisons all over, you know what I mean, the United States, all over the world, you know, and they still love their, you know what I mean, love their kid. And it's hard to hear people say that, you know what I mean, you don't because you made like a certain decision, like a poor decision and whatnot. And, you know, we look at this thing, I mean, like literally, like Ann said, you know, we're going back from slavery. There was no such thing as a black family. There was no such thing as a marriage, you know what I mean? That's why we still have traditions like jumping the broom, because marriage, you know what I mean, which is the cornerstone of a family, you know, at least in the traditional sense, is it wasn't allowed. So it was never a thing. It wasn't even just a narrative. They controlled, and continue to in many ways, control the reality of it, if you will. You know what I mean? Like this systemically, it's just blocking people or preventing people from having, you know what I mean, healthy parent-child relationships. You know, so when you see that and you see this narrative being pushed, and you see things like Section 8, where Section 8 is like literally saying, yo, like, you can't have a man in that house.
Is it still like that now? I think so, isn't it?
I want to say, I believe that it is. I believe it is. 'Cause I know one thing close to it that both Ann and I were, like, just until recently, like in Delaware anyway, like, if you came home from prison and you had a felony, like, you couldn't be in that house. You know what I'm saying?
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's like it makes no sense, you know. Like why? What?
It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense for doing it, and you know what I mean. Actually, it's quite diabolically ingenious because like you're literally you're just breaking it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean. You're breaking the flower at the stem. You know what I mean. Before it get out here, let me break this right here. Back. It's never gonna grow right. You know what I mean. Not saying that a person can't be a healthy, well-adjusted human being without a father, but having parents there, two parents who love you, care for you, providing resources, and providing social emotional support to help you develop emotionally and mentally as a healthy human being. You know what I mean? It's the odds.
Yeah.
2 is better than 1. You know what I mean? So.
Well, it's also, to your point, Chloe, it's systemic, right? It isn't that it can't be done, right? I mean, I think that speaks more to the resilience of Black families, of Black communities, of brown families and brown communities. If you think about immigration, right, what they're doing in terms of like putting kids in cages, separating, you know, kids from their parents because they want to have opportunity, literally, right? Like people are coming to the U.S. because they have been sold, right, this narrative that this is the land of opportunity. And not to mention the policies that the U.S. puts in place that actually harms those other countries, which is why they're coming over in the first place. But then it's like, it's their fault. It's like, it's their fault for not wanting to be bombed and persecuted? Like, what?
Yeah.
But I understand what you're saying about it doesn't make sense from a logical standpoint.
Rational human being.
Yeah, well,
Exactly.
I come home and just because I got a felony, I can't live in the house. Like,
Yeah.
why not? You know.
Well, even the assumption about criminality, right? That if you, I mean, technically, if you served your time, you've served, right? You've done what you're supposed to. And it's like, so why am I still being punished?
Yeah. And you know, I sit back and just thinking about the narrative, like what people say versus what you see. Like today, like even today, like over the program, you know, I'm sitting back and I'm watching cool shit. I'm watching 2, 3 guys come in here that, if you, based on society, how people see them, you see them like, you might think that these people ain't about nothing, but I see these dudes coming in here regularly, dropping off and picking up their kids, man. Like they involved in these kids' lives, man. I see you, you know what I mean? You're not even 30 years old, and you're an awesome father to your kids, you know what I mean? And it's just like, you know, it's I ain't gonna say it's sad, it's infuriating sometimes, you know? To see that person, man, it's infuriating, man, because I see him, and you know how hard it is out here to be a parent, period, let alone, you know what I mean, a father, because it's like the conversation we had the other day, more like the ability to take care of your family, like it's getting squished more and more, and people are making do, you know what I mean, and the sad part is a lot of people are making do by working more. You know, every person I know, middle class, everybody I know has 1.5 jobs. You know what I mean? And at least. You know what I mean? And then you got people that's doubling up, doing like working 2 jobs and double time at a time. It's like, okay, like when can I be a parent to my children?
Kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul, right?
Yeah.
Because you got to work to take care of your family, but with working, the opportunity cost is time missed with your child and. You know,
it's a system. When you start seeing the science of it, man, it's like, whoa, this thing is real. It's real.
When even the ways that, like I'm thinking about incarceration. So it's not only that your parent is incarcerated, but then to go see them, right? Many times they place people not close to home.
Yeah.
So then it's harder to go see
the
person, right? If you have the means to do it. And then once you go, you get treated, right? Like you've done something wrong. You gotta get patted down.
And I was young. Like I'm thinking now, like I got a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, which should be 10 November. Ahmad just turned 8, my middle child, and I was their ages going down there. It's like, sheesh. Yeah. And that's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
So how do you remember that time?
It was terrible. One, because I was missing my Saturday morning cartoons. Well, we had to get up all early on a Saturday, and you know, my grandma wanted to put me in these nice clothes and comb my hair, and I jump in the car with my other grandmother and my grandpa, and we drive down to Smyrna, which felt like forever at the time. It really is only an hour and a half, but I ain't have no iPhone, no iPad, no coloring book.
No.
Yeah, sit and put my hand on my head and wait till we get there. But when you get there, you can't bring any keys, no wallet, no card, no pencil, pen, nothing. So you got to put that in a locker. I think they made you pay for the lockers.
Mhm.
You remember?
I bet they did.
I wasn't on that side.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure they did.
They probably you had to pay for the locker, then you had to wait. I don't know if they called your name or what, or if you went through in groups, but you go through and you had to they had to wind you down and pat you down, and then you go and then they put you in like this box room type of thing. Shut one door, shut the other door, and I remember sitting in there, and I'm at the time was like claustrophobic, and now looking back on it, it was not. It was less claustrophobic and more of I just didn't like some stranger being in control of whether or not I could leave a room.
Yeah.
You know, anything could go wrong, or we get locked in there, and I'm just kind of stuck, right?
Yeah.
A child going
Right.
through this.
Exactly.
They open the other door and you walk through, and it's fenced on both sides, and it's barbed wire at the top. And then they lock that door, and you're stuck in that area. And then they open the other door, and then they let you through, and then it's like the bathroom and the waiting area or whatever. And then you walk around, and then you can walk out into the park. And I mean, that's like a 20-minute ordeal, and it was nerve-wracking.
Mm-hmm.
It's nerve-wracking. Once you get to the park, and then your family comes out, you get to sit down and eat and talk and laugh and ride down the little slide that they put out there, and you know, whatever. But up until that, it's like, sheesh.
Yeah.
That's a family breaker, man.
Yeah.
Those places, and you know, I mean, that and those visits that you're talking about, those are honor visits. Like you get 2 of them a year, and down here anyway, you get 2 of them a year. And if you get like a write-up for like having a fucking just extra pair of underwear or something like that, it's a wrap. You won't get to have that picnic, you know what I mean, that little time with your family, those few hours, whatever like that. So.
And I think some of that goes back to the narrative that you were talking about, right? That the assumption is if a person has been incarcerated, that they are somehow less worthy of their humanity,
Yeah.
right? And so people will say, well, they shouldn't have done it. It's like, well, okay, first of all, how many people are currently locked up for stuff they did not do?
Right.
1.
Yeah.
2, how many are locked up for a basic, like parole violation, right? Or because they didn't have enough money to pay bail to get themselves out as they await trial, because
Right.
they're not guilty. We're waiting to see if they're guilty. So I think people don't think about that, but I think that's the narrative piece, right? If we think about movies and cartoons, everything, like from the time we're shorties till now, it's this very law and order, good guy, bad guy, right? There's no complexity to what is the system that forces someone or limits options for
Right.
legal work, right? Especially now, you were saying 1.5 jobs. That's assuming you get paid a decent salary,
Yeah.
right? If I can make more hustling on the street than working at Family Dollar, well, I'm going to make sure my family gets fed.
Right. That's right.
Could you imagine being like locked up in a state where marijuana is legal, and you're serving time, and you get to read the paper saying that recreational use and selling is legal, and you doing time for selling marijuana? Like, could you imagine how mind-blowing that could be, and how much that could crush a person? Like, they just decided one day, like, it's legal now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, look at all the people impacted. I know that they're doing some work to try to get these people out and wipe their records and all of that, but I mean, even still, with that, time served is time served.
Yeah.
And it's time away from your family. I wonder how that's going to play out and impact people.
Yeah.
Well, in time that you can never get back, right?
Sure.
Your kid, you can't be 3 again,
Yeah.
right? Once you've missed that birthday, once you've missed that football game, that soccer, whatever it is, like you can't get that back. And I think, to me, that's the infuriating part, that people really don't understand, like the long-lasting negative impact that has. And again, I think it speaks more to the power of the individuals who come home, right, the families that endure, who are able to reconcile in healthier ways, it's a testament to their strength and not a reflection of like a system that works.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally agree with that. So let me ask you something that, and flipping it around a little bit. So from, you know, from your experience and your professional experience, like, what is it that works to help strengthen families and help strengthen bonds and relationships between fathers and their children? All parents, but, you know, we put an emphasis on fatherhood, but out of the ashes, and us and dad, so.
Time is huge, and I think unfortunately that, to your point, like when you work, it's hard to have that time. Research shows though most kids, like that's really, they just want the time. Mm-hmm. And I think even, again, I think it's media tells us that being a good parent looks a particular way. But most kids, it's consistency, stability. Right, those are the two big pieces literature shows, like for healthy development, kids need stability and consistency, whatever that looks like. So even if it's not as regular contact, for that young person knowing like every 2 weeks or every, you know, month, I'm gonna get to see my dad, right, or my mom, right, but I know we're focusing on dads, but it's that consistency, right, that's again, that security in that young person's mind that I'm gonna get to see them. Right, and the parallel I'll give, just because I think society sees it as honorable, is like people who go into the military, right? So they lose contact, they don't get to see their kids as much, but you know, a Sunday call, every Sunday knowing between 4 and 6, dad's gonna call, right? Those visits, right, they get, I don't know what it's called, I'm not in the military, but you know what I mean, like once boot camp's over, whatever, like knowing that they can see them consistently or hear from them consistently is the biggest piece. And it really doesn't matter what you do with the child, obviously if it's not something negative, I don't want to say like anything, but that you're actively participating in whatever it's happening, whether it's a walk in the park, whether it's just being in the moment, putting a puzzle together, coloring together. Like I think, especially, and I do not have any biological children of my own, I will say, but just spending time with the child, but like actively spending time makes a world of a difference versus your home, right? Because you have kids, and I'll go on the other end of the spectrum, especially wealthy families, they have stability, right? They are well taken care of in terms of material goods. Mm-hmm. A lot of those young people talk about not seeing their parents, right? Or the relationship they had was with the nanny or with the au pair, right? The person who raised them, but actually their parents, they don't really have a relationship with their parents. Right. So I think people assume that if you have money, then you're a good parent. That is not guaranteed. Yeah. So I just think, you know, the biggest thing is to be present and to be consistent.
Yeah, awesome. So before we wrap up, you are an author. So
I didn't know that.
Yes. She is an author.
Oh, okay.
She always trying to hide it. You see how she looked at me when I said that?
I'm not hiding it. I mean, that's part of the work. That's what we do.
So tell us your book, the name of your book, a little bit about it, and where we can find it at.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So the name of my book is From Charity to Equity, Race, Homelessness and Urban Schools. It is out of Teachers College Press. You can find it at Teachers College Press website. I think it's available on Amazon. You can contact me if you want to get a copy. Yeah. And what is it about? Okay, the title kind of talks about it, but basically I spent a full academic year in 2 Chicago public high schools, working with young people, specifically Black students who were unaccompanied. So that means they were not in the consistent care of a parent or guardian. And I wanted to understand this educational policy called the McKinney-Vento Act that guarantees students and families that are experiencing homelessness the right to an education. So both of you, I'm sure know, especially if you have younger children, when you go to enroll your kid in school, they want proof of address. Right. Well, if you don't have a stable address, you can't give it, which prior to 1987, what that meant was that kids were missing school. So when this law was enacted, it said it doesn't matter if you have birth certificate, proof of address, immunization, enroll the kids immediately in school, because what I talked about before, kids need stability, right? Consistency. So and the two places that happens for young people is home and school. So when home is disrupted, school becomes that much more important. And kids were missing, right, the school, which meant time with their peers, right, time with teachers, consistent adults. So I wanted to understand the policy, but I specifically wanted to understand, similar to what we were talking about, narrative. The assumption is that if a young person is not living at home with their parents, that they are, delinquent, or they don't want to live by certain rules. But the reality is that for many of those kids, either their parents are struggling to provide financially, so sometimes kids will leave to make it actually easier for their parents, or abuse and neglect is happening, right? And so the child decides, I'll take a risk on my own instead of, staying in an abusive household. So for me, I was thinking, like, as a teenager, if I didn't have parents, especially a very strict dad, who was like, go to school, do good. And we had, in Chicago, I'll just say, like, during my time, we had house parties during the day, right? Most of the parents, working class parents, they're at work during the day, so hey, you can have parties. So I was like, would I be in school consistently if I didn't have a parent waking me up and making sure? So I wanted to speak to the resilience and the strength of these young people, right? Who could have just been out on the street. They didn't have to be in school because they didn't have someone telling them, get up, go to school. I wanted to look at it from a racial lens because unfortunately, like most quote unquote problems that are created, right, by these systems and structures, is there was an overrepresentation. There was still overrepresentation of Black and brown students among those that experience homelessness. So when I saw that structural pattern, I wanted to understand, how does race and class impact, right, what's happening in the school, specifically around that policy, right? If teachers already have low expectations of poor Black and brown students, how much will they push for a policy that basically serves to benefit these young people? So I wanted to understand from the young people's perspective, like, is this policy working for you? I also interviewed every school or district, depending on the size, should have a liaison, a homeless liaison, and their job is to identify students and connect them to the services guaranteed them their educational right under McKinney-Vento. So I interviewed the liaisons at the schools, and then because Chicago is so gangster, Chicago Public Schools was sued by this organization called the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless for non-compliance of McKinney-Vento. Wow. Yes, which resulted in, it's called the Salazar Decree. So Salazar was one of the families, right, that the organization brought suit against Chicago Public Schools. So I interviewed the lead lawyer on that case to get her perspective and understanding around the law, race, right, and homeless families. So
that was dope, man. Yeah. Give it up for Ann, everybody. Yo, that was dope.
Questions.
Dope.
Out of the children that you interviewed, was the policy working for any of them?
Not really. Quite honestly, which most of the kids honestly did not really understand the policy. So there is a one-pager that the district would give to schools so that young people and their families know what their rights are. As part of my interviews with them, I would show them the paper and say, have you ever seen this before? The 6 kids I interviewed, qualitative research, spent a year, field observations, all that kind of stuff. No, never seen this. And I would say, okay, well, what on here would be of benefit to you? They're like, I didn't know I could get this. I didn't know I could get that. Wow. So many of them didn't know what their rights were. So part of not the, well, you all know PAR, right? So
Right.
I didn't realize, I didn't discover PAR until after this, but my thing was like, these young people should know what their rights are so that they can advocate for themselves, right? Because they didn't have an adult coming into the school to be advocates. So I would say, here, take this. These are your rights, and they should enforce them. So that's actually what led me to think more about PAR, specifically youth participatory action research, is how do we equip young people with the knowledge, skills, and tools so that they can be advocates for themselves. And it came from that research, seeing that so many of these kids did not know what their rights were.
Nice. Wow. You got anything for the awesome Dr. Aviles?
No, that was incredible. I actually
Thank you.
want to read the book.
Yeah, we definitely gotta get the book.
Okay.
Definitely gotta get the book.
Thank you all.
No, thank you. Thank you. I'm almost glad. This might sound crazy. I'm almost glad that the Zoom messed up. I think this was a better interview.
Definitely.
You know.
Okay.
But again, definitely thank you. Thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for everything that you've done. We really appreciate you. All the work that you've done with the people in Chicago, the work that you're doing here in Wilmington, Delaware, and just being a super duper dope, awesome professor, and all the support you've shown us with Out of the Ashes, man.
Absolutely.
It was really a blessing to have you here.
Thank you.
So, with that, I'm your co-host, Coley Harris.
And before I close this out, real quick, people at home and so are people that are listening, two things. One, give us a share on Facebook or on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Link will be down in the description. And two, we're looking for sponsors. So if you're interested, if you like the content, and you like what you hear, reach out to us, outoftheashesllc.com. I'm your other co-host, Amar Melton.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Dad. Clear. That was dope. That was nice. That was cool.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to remember, like, what did I say in the first interview? I don't even remember some of it. So
We got about an hour, too.
We did. We got a nice bit. I was looking at it.
Yeah, that was a good one.
It was a good one. Getting back in the swing. Back at it.
Calvin reached out to me and he was telling me about Little Dirk and his dad. Remember we had kind of reached out before?
Yeah.
It was a dead end. I think I might give it a shot again.
Yeah, do that, man. I was trying to get
Cole?
Cole, I was trying to go through Cole B, and I wasn't able to connect with him. So,
Reach
you
out.
know, we'll reach out. Let's see.
I didn't know Wright was running for mayor.
Yeah.
what is the deal with the mayors?
Hold on.